The wrong work of centers. One of the basic ideas found in this system of teaching is that humanity has several different minds, and our intellect is but only one of the minds that we possess. Take by illustration a diagram of the different centers according to this teaching. Each of these centers is a mind, and each of them represents, at the same time, a different kind of mind. Centers can be roughly compared with very delicate and extremely complex mechanisms, each machine being designed for a different purpose and use. Furthermore, each is made of separate smaller mechanisms or of machines within machines, and these can each work all by themselves. The whole center or whole mechanism can work as one synchronous whole, or only a small part of it can work independently. Everyone possesses these highly complex and delicate mechanisms. However, most know nothing or next to nothing about them. People are in fact likely to use them incorrectly. In fact, they believe they have only one mind, and that this one mind can deal with absolutely everything, which forms the basis of Freudian psychology. The idea of one mind is linked with the illusion that we are one, a monism, with the form of imagination that everyone carries about with them, namely that they are internally one, a unity, having one will, one permanent I, and possessing full consciousness, self-knowledge, and the power to do. It is a fundamental and complex thing that one cannot reflect upon deeply enough, for it leads to the source of our inner sickness. It takes so long before people can bear to realize that internally they are not one but many, that they are not a unity and harmony, but a multiplicity and disharmony. That they have not one permanent and real I, but hundreds of different and quite contradictory I's that take charge of them at different moments. That they have no real will, but a host of changing conflicting wills, belonging to each of these I's. That only rarely do they have moments of consciousness, therefore usually are in a peculiar state of waking sleep or day walking. And that as a result of all this they have no real power of doing, so live and go about their activities in a world where everything simply happens to them, and no one can prevent this from occurring. The idea that an individual has not one mind but different centers or minds, can be resented or regarded as being as fantastic as saying that people are not conscious. No one will face themselves and their real situation. So we cling to what we imagine ourselves to be, and by clinging in this way, to what does not exist, to what is unreal, making it impossible to exist and to become real, which is what we might become and are actually created to become. It is said in this work that everyone can be a millionaire, but in order to be a millionaire they must first realize that they are not a millionaire. In this regard everyone is like the rich young man in the parable, the man rich in feeling his own merit, who ascribed goodness to himself as his own possession, and was deeply identified with his virtues. Remember that he was told to go and dispose of it all, then give to the poor, that is to the real or essential ungrown inner part of himself, starved by that rich false personality. Someone is not likely to take in anything that is said about the wrong work of centers unless they have reached the point of recognizing for themselves that different centers really do exist in them. We need to understand that this is not some fantastic notion, or merely some theoretical idea. It is a fact, and it is a fact of the greatest importance to anyone that wishes to use their life well, not make it something blurred, unformed, and largely meaningless. For this reason the first thing we are told to do regarding practical work on ourselves, is to observe which center or centers are working at any particular moment. We are told to practice self-observation, which is the only road leading to self-change in relation to noticing the different centers in us. But even this is very difficult, and people do not after a long period really see for themselves that these centers exist in them. Or they try to observe them for a moment and think that is all that is needed. There are three different people in all of us, to begin with, the intellectual, the emotional, and the instinctive or moving, corresponding to these three centers or minds. That is, a person thinks one thing, feels another, and then senses a third, that is their sensations, which belong to their instinctive center are different from their feelings, which belong to the emotional center. Or their thoughts which belong to the intellectual center. We can illustrate this and suppose that one is trying to stick to some sort of aim, and have taken the trouble to make this aim or resolution clear to ourselves. Suppose then that we get upset by something. What will happen next? taking the matter only from the standpoint of different centers. If we are upset or distressed, it means that the emotional center has become negative. We feel angry, frustrated, disappointed, or perhaps even feel that nothing is worthwhile. Now suppose that we follow the mind of the emotional center as it is in that moment. Will we be likely to stick to our resolution, whatever it was? No, of course not. But if we can get into our intellectual center, assuming of course that one can, then think about our aim, and what it was that made us make it in the first place, then we may still stick to that resolution. Why? Because we are using the appropriate center for the occasion. We are not using the wrong center. For to use or to follow the emotional center when it is negative is always to use the wrong center. This example demonstrates the wrong work of centers, not so much in the sense of the wrong centers being used for any particular task, as for example in trying to think how to run quickly downstairs, but in the sense of using the wrong part of a particular center. As mentioned, each center is divided into 3 parts, and each of these parts into 3 further parts. What we're looking at here is the division of some of the centers into positive and negative sides. Each center reflects itself and the others in its 3 divisions, and 3 subdivisions. For example, the intellectual center has 3 divisions, which represent the instinct-moving center, the emotional center, and the intellectual center itself, but all on a smaller scale. Then these again are subdivided in the same way on a still smaller scale. The instinct-moving part of any center is the most mechanical part, and it is in these mechanical divisions of centers that people spend their lives as a rule. But before we look in detail at the division of centers, one principle must be grasped relating to their divisions. Why do people spend their time in mechanical divisions of centers? The answer is simply that this requires no attention. When attention is practically 0, one is in the lowest, most automatic parts of a center. The result is that a person says and does things without any idea of what they are doing. Another result is that a person cannot adapt to any change or use their knowledge, but behaves absolutely mechanically on all occasions, and repeats what they know like a machine. You all notice how hard it is for many people to adapt themselves to new ideas or conditions, and how they repeat all they have been taught as if they were schoolchildren. To get into higher divisions of centers, the effort of directed attention is necessary. This is the principle. Now let's take the mechanical part of intellectual center as a starting point. Its function is the work of registration of memories and impressions or associations, and this is all it should do normally. That is, if correctly used. It should never reply to questions addressed to the whole center. Above all, it should never decide anything important. Now here we have the first example of wrong work of centers with regard to their parts and divisions. The mechanical division of intellectual center, which is called the formatory part or formatory center, is continually replying to questions, and is continually making decisions. It replies anyhow, in slang terms, typical phrases and jargon of all sorts, picked up from trends, peer pressure and social culture. It replies automatically, and says just what it is most accustomed to say, like a parrot. Or on a slightly higher scale, it replies always in a stereotypical way, pedantic, like a schoolmaster or government official, using well-known sentences, party maxims, slogans, proverbs, wisecracks, and so on. The strange thing is that many people reply always in this way and never notice it, either because they cannot think about anything and rely on mechanical, even automatic expressions of the intellectual center, or because they do not see the importance of thinking for themselves, of freeing their thoughts from the mechanical words and expressions that belong to the lowest divisions of the center. We come then to attention or focus. Attention puts us into better or more conscious parts of centers. Attention is of 3 kinds. 1. Zero attention, which characterizes mechanical divisions of centers. 2. Attention that does not require effort, but is attracted and needs only the rejection of irrelevant things. 3. Attention that must be directed through effort and will. As mentioned, the first kind of attention, zero attention, accompanies the work of mechanical divisions of centers. The second kind puts us into the emotional divisions of centers, and the third kind into the intellectual divisions. Let's again then take the intellectual center as an example, as we shall have to return to this subject anon. The emotional part of the whole intellectual center consists chiefly of the desire to know, the desire to understand, to seek knowledge, to discover, to increase one's understanding, to grasp and to find out, to have the satisfaction of knowing, the desire for truth, the pleasure of learning, of reaching out. And inversely, the pain of not knowing, the dissatisfaction of being ignorant, uninformed, and so on. The work of the emotional part requires full attention, but in this part of the center attention does not require effort. It is attracted and kept by the interest of the subject itself. The intellectual part of the whole intellectual center includes a capacity for creation, construction, invention, finding methods, seeing connections, and bringing together apparently isolated things into an order or unity of formulations, so that we see the truth of something hitherto obscure. This part cannot work without directed attention. The attention in this part is not attracted but must be controlled and maintained through effort and will. We usually avoid doing the work belonging to this part of the center, which is therefore often unused. From this we can notice in what parts of centers we are. We've looked at the wrong work of centers from the point of view of using wrong divisions of centers, and from the principle of attention. Then noted that people inhabit or live in small divisions of centers, mostly in mechanical divisions. It is important then to understand that all the different eyes in us live in smaller or larger divisions of centers. That is to say, we have more mechanical or less mechanical eyes. In the small divisions, in the mechanical or even automatic parts of centers dwell most of the eyes that control our ordinary day-to-day life. In this sense, people inhabit or live in small mechanical divisions of centers. Which means our ordinary life is largely controlled by very little mechanical eyes that inhabit these small subdivisions of centers. These should be servants and not our masters, for we have eyes of different power or quality and capacity. For example, the eyes that live in small subdivisions of centers are incapable of understanding this work and very limited or easily overwhelmed. They cannot change. They are primitive and suspicious of anything new. The little eyes that we use in ordinary life, the eyes that quarrel and feel discontented, that are occupied with little plans, little suspicions, little things, little interests, and paranoia are in mechanical parts of centers. They are quite useful for little things, but cannot understand the work. They belong to little parts of centers. Sometimes you find people who are so much in these small daily eyes that they are incapable of understanding anything, save what belongs to their immediate petty interests, and to the outlook of these little eyes that occupy themselves only with the small things of daily life, which are very important on that scale, on the scale of insignificance. These small eyes have their rightful place, and if they deal with what belongs to them, they do their work as they should quite adequately. We must all possess trained eyes of this sort. As you know, a person must be developed to some extent in all parts of centers in order to become number 4 man or balanced man. But, as was said, these small eyes cannot grasp the work, they cannot adapt themselves to the ideas of this work, and if work ideas fall only upon these little small daily life eyes, the work cannot be received and rightly placed in a person's being. In short, this work, if taken in only by these small self-interested daily eyes, will only be understood at their own petty level of understanding, at the level of being of these little eyes. This work should fall on bigger eyes, and never be allowed to sink to small eyes. This is a very real and important side of work on oneself. It is important not to let small eyes living in small parts of centers think and decide about the ideas of this work. From a practical point of view and as a direct example of the wrong work of centers, we need to understand what is meant. The study of wrong work of centers is not merely a matter referring to the wrong use of a center, such as using the thinking center for running quickly downstairs, in which case we'd stumble and fall. But a question of using the right part of a center in relation to what has to be done at any particular time. There are different things that we are called upon to deal with at different times, so we possess not only different centers or minds. The intellectual for complex comparisons and thoughts, the moving for complex movements far quicker than thought, the emotional for seeing the quality of things, the relations and meanings hidden from the intellectual, and so on. But each center is divided and subdivided into parts, each having its rightful place in the scheme of things, and its proper function. To return to the intellectual center, the mechanical part includes in itself all the work of registration of memories, associations, and impressions, and this is all the work it should do normally. That is, when the other centers and parts of centers are doing their proper work too. It should only do the work of registration or recording, like a secretary taking down what is said and arranging it. It should never reply to questions addressed to the whole center, and should never decide anything important. But unfortunately it is often deciding and always replying. In its narrow limited way, with ready-made phrases or anecdotes. It continues to say the same things and work in the same mechanical ways under all conditions. This is the fixed part of us, and when we dwell intellectually in the mechanical divisions of intellectual center, we will not change. Nothing can be new in us, but we will see life always in a certain way and say the same things, like a gramophone or recording. But if we have another part of us developed in a larger division, the case will be quite different. We will then have a very mechanical dead side, and a different facet, that is more conscious and living. Namely, one that lies in either the emotional or intellectual divisions. A balanced individual in the work sense is developed to some extent in all parts, mechanical, emotional and intellectual, of all centers. These are represented in them by some eyes and they are not like empty rooms. This distributes their energy, and brings our psychic life into harmony, but it is only through ideas similar to those of this work, namely, ideas coming from influences, from the conscious circle of humanity, from those who have reached full internal stature, that the harmonious development of centers is possible. Life interests alone are bound to lead to one-sided development, and no individual can develop only through self-interest, for then they will only develop certain parts of emotional center. If the work falls on the mechanical side of intellectual center, it will fall among eyes that deal with the ordinary daily affairs of life. These eyes are fed by influences and are for use in life, so they cannot understand what this work is about, or why the work is even necessary. They are tuned to outer visible life which is the sum total of reality for them. Only what they can see and touch is real and nothing else. There is therefore no soil for work ideas to grow from, for the work is not about the things of sense that can be seen or handled, but begins with self-observation, with what cannot be seen or handled. We should understand now how dangerous it is for those who have been given the opportunity of receiving the work in larger parts of centers, in bigger eyes, to allow its ideas to fall down in themselves into little mechanical eyes, where they will be divided or even torn to shreds. This is really the basic idea of sacrilege or profanation, that it belongs to the wrong work of centers. This work must always be thought about with attention, and with focus, for this puts a person into the intellectual parts of centers. With regard to the hearing of ideas of the work with little narrow eyes, we know the parable about the sower and the seed. A person who lives only in very small parts of centers, in little personal things, who on hearing of this work will only understand it in a very limited way. This situation is mentioned in the parable. The seed means the ideas of esotericism, the ideas of this work. If the ideas of this work fall as living seeds on very small eyes, on very little parts of centers inhabited by small, mechanical eyes, then it is as if the seed, the ideas of this work fall by the wayside. This is where it mentions, the sower went forth to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some fell by the wayside, and it was trodden underfoot, and the birds of the heaven devoured it. And other fell on the rock, and as soon as it grew, it withered away, because it had no moisture. And other fell among thorns, and the thorns grew with it and choked it. And other fell into the good ground, and grew, and brought forth fruit 100-fold. Luke, chapter 8, verse 8. Interpreting this parable to his disciples, the Christ says, the seed is the word of God. And those by the wayside are they who have heard, then cometh the devil, and taketh away the word from their heart, that they may not believe and be saved. Understand why it is called the wayside. This means that the ideas of the work fall amid the traffic of one's mind, among the ordinary thoughts of one's life, and are taken in the mechanical side of the mind, which Christ calls the devil, for mechanicalness is the devil. We know that in the work sense, a person can only understand at their level of being. This means that if we meet an individual on a higher level of being than our own, we will not understand them. And if we live in very little small, very limited mechanical eyes, then that represents our level of being. We will then only understand what is very small, minimal, very personal. And as was said, if we center ourselves in these little eyes, those small eyes that relate to the small business of our daily life, and to our little jealousies, hatreds, and desires or self-interest, then we will be unable to adapt ourselves to anything new. So the ideas of the work will fall by the wayside and either be quite meaningless to us or even ridiculous, silly, unnecessary, and fantastic. This means that we will understand the work at this level of our being, and everyone has a scale of being. That is, a person has, provided that they have magnetic center, a better level and better eyes in them. If they try to find them through which to understand this work. One sign of which is the possession of magnetic center, which can distinguish between A. influences and B. influences. The mechanical divisions of centers have their proper work to do, and they can work rightly without attention, or with very little attention. When we walk, the action requires very little focus, and only from time to time at that. All the complex movements involved in the act of walking are done rightly by the mechanical divisions of moving center without our giving them much thought. We can prove this is done by the mechanical division of moving center because while walking, our hands can be engaged in movements that require conscious direction, i.e. attention as in sharpening a pencil or unraveling string, and so on. But just because the mechanical parts of centers can work with zero attention or very little occasional attention, they often act independently. We go to dress for work or to go out, while thinking over a problem and eventually find ourselves, to our surprise, driving to our mother's house, with no recollection of whether or not we locked the front door on our way out, or turned the stove off. Everyone has such examples. The whole human machine is made in such a way that one part can in an emergency do the work of another part for a certain time. This is expressed in this system by saying that centers overlap to some extent with regard to function. And although it is because centers overlap to a limited extent that the human machine can meet with certain emergencies, and is therefore more capable of adjustment, it is actually because of the overlapping that occasions for the wrong working of centers are given. To take as example, we know that breathing can be carried on without our attention. Here the moving center which contracts and relaxes the muscles used in breathing, is controlled by the instinctive center, which estimates the condition of the blood at every moment and increases and decreases the rate of respiration accordingly. However, we cannot observe this directly. We cannot observe the instinctive center and its intricate task of attending to the inner work of our organs. But we can observe the results of its work, namely that after exercise or running we breathe more deeply, or if we are feverish we breathe more rapidly, and realize that this is because the instinctive center needs more oxygen. However, breathing is not only carried out by the instinct moving center. There is an overlapping of control, for we can breathe deliberately, that is voluntarily. A person cannot hold their breath voluntarily beyond a certain time because the instinctive center will take over their breathing for them as soon as they begin to lose consciousness. An individual can interfere with their breathing and make themselves breathe more slowly or more deeply, and so on through meditation. This is uncommon, but there are moments when it is very important, and when in fact it can save a person's life. If, however, one tries to control their breathing without understanding what they are doing, and without knowledge, they may interfere with the normal working of the instinct moving center, which then becomes lazy, and as it were hands over the business of breathing in part. Some students who expect to gain increased powers by means of breath control are foolish unless they have gone through long preliminary training under a yogin, and selected for this instruction by them. They are fools because they interfere with a function which, once wrongly interfered with for long enough, might never work normally afterwards. The question of the wrong work of centers is a matter of lifelong study through self-observation. In order to understand anything we must realize its nature, otherwise one will approach it wrongly or have the wrong attitude towards it. We cannot understand centers and their right and wrong work in just a moment. If we think we can, then we will ask the wrong questions and indeed never take in anything about the subject. Think about it a moment. All of our life is a function of, and is controlled by centers, our thoughts, our feelings, ideas, hopes, fears, loves, hates, our actions, sensations, pleasures, our comforts and so on. How, then, can we expect to understand all about the right and wrong work of centers in a short time? To do so is like expecting to understand all about life after hearing a lecture or two on it. What has been shared here is only to give some indication of what is meant and to make us begin to study the subject. Unless we study it through self-observation, and practice applied to our own lives, then even if we hear 1,001 lectures on the matter, we will not understand a single thing.